Hello everyone! I didn't think my first serious video of the year was going to be a reply video to HBomberGuy, but hey, I had a lot of free time, I watched a 2-hour video of his, and I found some of the things he said very questionable. So we may as well get straight into it. HBomberGuy uploaded about a month ago a video called Roblox_oof.mp3, in which HBomberGuy decided to explore where this particular sound came from. And the video is 2 hours long for very good reasons. It takes HBomberGuy, from now on he will be referred to as Harris, about 7 minutes to actually say where this sound originally came from. It was a very niche old game called Messiah, and it was created by a man called Joey Kuras, who worked Tommy Tallarico's company, and basically the next hour and a half of the video is explaining who Tommy Tallarico is, and effectively why he is one of the worst people on the planet. Long story short, he is a serial liar, has been involved with hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of fraud, which the United States of America has obviously punished him for. He has been one of the reasons Gamergate existed in the first place, for having absolutely, well, not zero journalistic integrity, but very little journalistic integrity. For instance, he worked on the sound design of the Tony Hawk games, and kept giving them favourable reviews when he was working on TV shows that were reviewing games. He also claims to have worked hand in hand with Miyamoto on the Metroid Prime series, or the first game specifically, when in reality he worked on that game for a few months, and then Retro Game Studios brought their own sound department in to make the sound effects for the game. And when this happened, he gave Metroid Prime very unfavourable reviews at the time. He also claims to have 7 Guinness World Records, and it turns out that most of them have either been rescinded, renamed, and basically just are not achievements in and of themselves. Harris has plenty of receipts for all these claims if you want to go through them. I would recommend the video actually, it is quite a good video, up until the end, because there is a reason I'm making this video. Because there is no doubt in my mind that Tommy Tallarico is a manipulative, awful person, who takes credit for things that he never made. And the problem I have with this is that Harris then leads into his conclusion with this.
I wanted this to be a story about how, in our modern age, we don't take ownership of artists' work seriously enough, through the lens of a sound effect that had been reused without credit for over a decade.
Right, so throughout the video at this point, Harris has been saying, I just wanted this to be a short video, where I simply find out where this sound came from and tell you it. It then went into over an hour of investigating Tommy Tallarico and explaining why he is a terrible person, which is fair enough. But then, right at the end of his video, he explains, oh no, the reason I really did this was because I love the artists. And hey, you can be inspired to do a video for whatever reason you want. But already I have quite a few issues with this, because it is fundamentally understanding how absolutely any type of product, whether it be something that is simply used to produce other things or to render other things, let's say a computer. You know, I've built 3 PCs in my time. Couldn't tell you who designed them. I just know that a lot of the pieces are from AMD, the power supplies from Corsair, and I've got Vengeance branded RAM. But this is the thing, I don't have to know anything about that. This is the point in the division of labour. I just know what the branding is, and the thing with branding is that it says, oh hey, you can trust us, or in Tommy Tallarico's case it says, hey, don't trust me whatever you do. But people who are, say, really into PC gaming and building PCs, whether they do it for a job or a hobby, they will know who makes these things. They will see names pop up and follow these particular names if they are very good designers of these things, and they will have particular appreciation for these people whose, you know, brains are being put to the test and really developing these things that pushes this technology to the state of the art. And a similar thing happens with artists. For instance, I had no idea who Tommy Tallarico was, but he has done the sound design for some games that I have played, and some games that I like. However, I had no idea who the guy is, and I don't know why I would need to appreciate his work, because in paying for the games that he has worked on, he has got everything he needs from me. That is the idea of the division of labour and contract law. I pay the publishers who sold the game, they then get the money, and through them, through their contracts with all the other people, it whittles its way down till it finally gets to the actual employees, and that includes artists. But this is the problem Harris has, it's, oh, the people actually making the game, i.e. the employees, aren't getting the recognition they deserve. To which my reply would be, well, they're being paid and that's all they asked for, so what's the problem? Well, Harris is going to go into it.
But the people not being credited in this story are the hardworking folks under Tommy who he has taken credit from over the years, and the original voice actor, none of whom will see any of the money Tommy makes from selling their sound today.
So right here there are a few points, and one of them is absolutely fair. Part of the video was about Tommy trying to sue Roblox for using an MP3 file that his company had created, and he basically wanted the money back, and in a long, drawn-out segment, it turns out he asked for money. Roblox said, here's a pittance. He thought it wasn't worth it, it never went to court, and Bomber Harris is saying here, well, he wants to take all the credit and all the money for every time that is used by Roblox, even though Roblox would simply just make another 0.3 second sound file. And he's absolutely right. What Tommy is trying to do in that particular saga is complete nonsense. However, he's assuming that the original voice actress, whoever she was, apparently it was some 6-year-old who's the niece of one of the producers of the games The Messiah. We have no idea who it is, and the voice actress probably doesn't even know that she is world famous because of 0.3 seconds of her going oof. Now, of all the people in the world who would care about this and want to find out, they could probably easily do that just by asking Tommy personally, hey, was it me? Was it this particular producer? I'm a niece of him. So if they cared that much, they probably could find out. And when it comes to the actual guy who designed the sound and recorded the sounds, this Jerry Kuras guy, he has a Twitter account, he has a LinkedIn account, both of which are fairly inactive, so this might not be as easy as simply going on Twitter and asking him if he cares about any of this. But we're making a hell of a lot of assumptions. It is clear that Kuras would actually like to take credit for things that he specifically worked on. The thing is, as we can tell from this comment on a Terminator Sega CD soundtrack YouTube video, yes, he would like to take credit for the work he did, i.e. composing the songs on the soundtrack from the Terminator, but he does clearly state that he was working with Tommy. It's not just a case of he did everything and Tommy took all the money, even from his own mouth. I can only imagine that there will have been a contract where Tommy, who ran the company, said, hey, you can be one of my employees, or maybe even a co-director of the company. I have no idea, I've not seen the contract. And there was an agreed upon sum for him to take the money, and within that clause it'd be, okay, whenever we do sound design or the music for a particular game, it will have both our names on, or it will have just mine, and we will have your name in the credits as well. Though on this particular Terminator game cover, it does say that the video game soundtrack is just by Tommy V. Tallarico, which also happens to be the name of the company that they were working for, which is probably why only his name appears on this game cover. And if this was agreed upon at the time, it was agreed upon at the time. There's not much you can do about it now apart from what he's doing, which is going into the comments and saying, oh, it was actually me that wrote these songs. I was working with Tommy for sound design on the rest of the game or something like that. So what I'm really trying to say here is that Harris's narrative here of Tommy manipulating his workers, taking all the credit, and running off with the money isn't the case. You can even tell from that comment there that he doesn't really hold that much of a bad grudge. He even mentions that he works with Tommy and doesn't seem to say that he's a manipulative tit in it, but would like to point out when work was entirely his, and that's absolutely fair enough. However, at the time, if he was happy just to make music and have Tommy take the credits while he takes some money for being employed by Tommy, I don't see a problem with that, but Harris obviously has to come along and say, no, I don't consent.
It is incredibly easy for hard work to be exploited by corporations, and one of those corporations happens to be called Tommy Tallarico Studios Incorporated.
And that is a perfect example of what I mean. It is the narrative of big evil corporations, even though Tommy Tallarico Studios was literally 2 people. And I do mean that. From all bits of evidence I can gather, the only 2 people who worked at Tommy Tallarico Studios was Tommy Tallarico and Jerry Kuras. And what I think is very underhanded from Harris here is that he is using this example to put words in Jerry Kuras's mouth. Again, we don't have much to go off because he is very silent when it comes to the internet, especially on his Twitter and LinkedIn. But we have absolutely no evidence whatsoever that Kuras felt exploited. We have no evidence that the relationship between him and Tommy Tallarico was manipulative in any way. We have no reason to assume that this wasn't just basic contract and an employee-employer relationship, or maybe even co-director's relationship. It's hard to say because there's not an awful lot of information about Tommy Tallarico Studios. But Harris here has seen that Tommy Tallarico is genuinely a lying, manipulative prick, and assume that because he has presented his video that way and found all this evidence about it, that Jerry Kuras must think the same thing. But as I say, there is no evidence of that, and from the comment I brought up before, he is fine to say that he worked with Tommy Tallarico, and that comment was only 3 years old. So to say Tommy Tallarico Studios is an evil corporation, it's nothing short of silly. It was a small sound effects and music business for video games. It's hardly anything massive. It was there so developers could outsource their sound design work to another studio, so that the developers that were making the skateboarding mechanics didn't have to worry about what it would sound like if someone fell off the skateboard in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. I suppose this is just the problem if you don't work in particular industries. I mean, I, for one, am a software developer. I know how these things work. Development teams will constantly outsource little bits and bobs of their development work to other companies because it's just busy work to them. They want to focus on the main selling point of their project and making sure that there's a, say, login application to their websites. They can't be bothered doing that. They may as well just outsource it. It's the exact same thing here, and we have no reason to believe there was exploitation here, but Harris is a communist, so he's obviously going to try and make that case.
But that's really a structural problem, and we already all know capitalism is bad. Statistically, your most formative memories are of a global financial crisis. You don't need that lecture from me.
That is genuinely quite a funny joke, by the way, and he is absolutely right, by the way. The left-wing millennials and Zoomers in both this country and in America are actually going more left-wing. And it is because of conclusions like this that come about because one particular individual is a lying tit. Harris then extrapolates it and says, yes, this is actually very representative of every corporation and every CEO, even though the biggest thing that Tommy Tallarico has ever made in terms of a successful business involved two people and involved making music and sound. And it is quite funny though, when you watch the rest of the video, he has plenty of clips of when Tommy Tallarico is on television giving his opinions and reviews on games. Now, that is actually creating art, whether you like it or not. But the thing is that it's the exact same relationship between Tommy and the producers of the show as it is with Tommy and Joey Kuras. They are both making art, and they are both employed by someone, and they are making an agreed wage for a particular contract. So if Joey Kuras was being exploited by Tommy here, then Tommy was being exploited by the producers, albeit to a much lesser extent, because his face and name were all over the show. However, the principle still applies, but this is the thing. Harris has to ignore that particular thing of someone having absolutely no journalistic integrity while being a journalist on TV. Because me pointing out that Tommy Tallarico was an employer for this particular television studio, all of a sudden his Marxist lens on all this of, oh, aren't the people at the top of corporations evil and all the employees being exploited, isn't that bad? It falls apart because the subject who is a absolute piece of work in his video is now the one being exploited, but he really doesn't want to go into that.
I think the unique lesson of this story is about, well, records in multiple senses of the word. What's really at stake here is history, how these events and people will be remembered. Tommy has cultivated such a reputation that when I asked about the origins of a famous punch sound effect on Twitter, someone independently brought him up and said they assume he must have done it. He seems to have done everything. At least he says he has.
So this is Harris's crux of the problem. He wants to have a go at capitalism when really what he's having a go at has not really much to do with capitalism. It is to do with how things are credited, and in this case, Tommy Tallarico makes a studio named after himself, so every time there's credits about sound design, it goes to him. And because his studio was a popular one to outsource sound design to, he obviously made quite a lot of sound effects, or I should say, which is a lot more accurate, his studio did. Which again, from everything I can tell, only had two people in it anyway, so that 50-50 is actually probably quite accurate, because it was either him or Joey.
The man has successfully inserted himself into conversations about sound effects he didn't even make, while the people who did the work attributed to him evaporate into namelessness.
Okay, how many of these people care? You need to point out how many of these people care, because as Joey has easily shown, and there is no doubt in my mind that it is in his massive portfolio that he can probably just publish publicly, that his name is on things that he finds relevant, and if he wants to publish his massive portfolio, he will. In fact, he did it in 2018. He has a demo reel on his own YouTube channel to show his sound designs. I don't think he wants his big name out there. I don't think he even wants to be recognised. For God's sake, his LinkedIn's locked and barely has anything on it. And clearly if he puts the effort in, which of course you need to put the effort in to make a demo reel, he will happily put his work out there for everyone to see and to have his name to. But from everything I can see, the guy just wants to be left alone and to do his work. He enjoys making the sounds. He doesn't necessarily want his name out there. Tommy did. But obviously, Tommy has the unfortunate salesman personality where he follows the Lionel Hutz law of salesmanship.
The truth and the truth.
And this is essentially where Harris's problem comes in. It's a personality defect. You can try and blame capitalism for giving him a shed load of money for it, but the fact of the matter is that he did earn some of that money at the very least. He did have a legitimate business, and he was a TV personality, albeit quite a niche one for gamers. Having said that, as Harris went through, he is also a colossal piece of work, genuinely a bad person, who is happy to lie to people to try and get investment money for what is just horrendous ideas. His idea for a games console was to have it so it can't connect online, and it basically forces people to only do split screen. He essentially made Game Boy Advances with HD graphics, and they could connect wirelessly. That was basically it. So Harris has a massive problem with Tommy, as a lot of people should do, and yet he is now trying to extrapolate it and say, this is actually standard practice, when he knows absolutely nothing about Joey Kuras, but because Harris has narcissistic tendencies, he is assuming that everyone does, and that everyone wants their name out there, when reality is, the guy just wants to make some sounds for games.
No one knows who Joey Kuras is, and he made the sound effects people think Tommy did.
Again, this is the fatal misunderstanding Harris has. Yes, it is wrong that people think Tommy made sound effects he didn't do and that Joey Kuras did instead. He is then misunderstanding that and thinks that Joey wants to have the life that Tommy has at the moment, where he is known by everyone and has an incredibly garish mansion that just screams tastelessness. However, again, from all evidence that I can see, Joey just wants to work on his games, and he probably has a family that he wants to support, and that's basically it.
It's not right for him and people like him to be forgotten. Games have always had problems crediting authors correctly. Early games were seen as products first and creative works second, so credit wasn't taken seriously. Creators used to not be allowed to put their name on the game and had to hide them in Easter eggs.
Yeah, Harris, that was a problem back in the 80s. It's one that has been pretty much fully remedied.
Mark Cerny wasn't allowed to keep any of his work or design documents when he was working at Atari, and his games were considered Atari creations, not his. His source code, notes, and documentation were only preserved because someone got them out of a dumpster when Atari closed the office and threw it all out.
Yep, interesting tidbits, and I do agree, Harris. If artists and people who worked on things do want their names plastered over it, they can work it into their contracts, and guess what? It is standard video game practice now. Why? Because enough people probably pushed for it. Again, I don't know the details, but I can come up with a very good reason as to why they didn't bother putting people's names in and having fully fledged credits when Atari games were first coming out. And the simple fact of the matter is, they had very limited memory. You know, they had less memory than your average blank Word document has. So these games companies would say to these programmers, right, make the game. And Atari was very well known for not being particularly good to their programmers, don't get me wrong. So I imagine they also didn't have time to even make a credit scene if they really needed to. And unless there's been NDA signed, there is absolutely no reason that these programmers can't tell people that they made the game. And that's a lot easier to do these days with Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook and all that. Hal Harris, you're doing the right thing here by telling people about this story. Yes, people now know who Joey Kuras is. That's great. We can't tell if he actually likes you saying these things about him, though, because he's gone dark on the internet. But I think it would be quite good if all these people you were trying to contact to give you legal advice and all that, it'd be quite nice if you actually tried to go out of your way to actually contact Joey Kuras and get his input on this video. Because that is not what you have done, and now you're putting words in his mouth. Oh, and by the way, I just had a quick Google check. I can tell from one of the very first Atari cases that I saw on Google that they do in fact have the programmers' names on the box. So it wasn't as clear-cut as they are definitely not allowed to put their names to these games. It was probably more a case of a mixture of they were so pressurised they didn't have time to put credits in that would have saved enough space if they optimised it, and it was also probably the case of they didn't have enough memory with the rest of the game to put a proper credit sequence in. So they just put it in Easter eggs, and they probably enjoyed making the Easter eggs as well. Which one of us is closer to the truth, me or Harris? I have no idea. But I am not going to sit around here and have him put words and ascribe malice to Atari when we have absolutely no evidence to assume that this was Atari's doing.
This problem has especially contributed to the perception of women working in games.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
Yoko Shimomura, one of the most well-known video game music composers today, a veritable industry icon one might say, composed all but 3 of the tracks on the original arcade version of Street Fighter 2.
Okay, Harris, please tell me how you know this.
But due to Capcom's crediting policy at the time, she was credited via a pseudonym. For her music's appearance on console releases and updated versions of the game, she was not credited for her compositions at all. All credit was given to the people who translated them to the new formats.
Again, contracts. This was agreed by her. Do you have any evidence here, Harris, that she had a problem with this? For all we know, she picked her pseudonym. I mean, honestly, I can't believe that Harris here is saying, yeah, these people signed contracts so that they could get paid. Oh, but I actually have problems with it. I mean, fine, have all the problems with it you want. Why should anyone care? And this is why I'm really annoyed. He's done a really, really good video pointing out that Tommy Tallarico is a lying, manipulative piece of work, and now he's shoehorning in a political agenda here, which he just didn't need to do. Don't get me wrong, it's interesting that proper crediting wasn't properly done in the first place. But for God's sake, this whole Tommy Tallarico business, the whole thing with his studios, it closed down in the early 2000s. I would love it if he had examples of it today where artists have a problem and this is the video where they are saying, look, I want to use this to get this problem out. But he's not doing it. He has to go back 40 years to say there was a problem. And in his videos, he's clearly showing all the information is out there. All he has done is put it all together. Which, don't get me wrong, is a good thing. But to then blame it on the capitalist system is ridiculous. And now he has to shoehorn the feminism in. And it's very irritating.
Her contributions to game music history are only recognised properly decades afterwards, because her early career was rendered invisible, music she wrote often being credited to someone else.
Again, as mentioned before, when it was credited to someone else, it is because they were reusing her original compositions and then translating it to the new file format. She didn't technically work on that game, so she doesn't need to be credited. She didn't get paid a single penny for that game. Why would her name be in the credits? And now I do agree with Harris, it would be polite if her real name was used and her name was on the games where her music is used. And as he just showed in that clip, that's how it's done now. But to idiot communists, if things weren't perfect at all times, then you have to condemn the entirety of the system that the particular problem is contained in. In this case, it's the entire gaming industry, even though indie games suffer with these similar problems too. It's just incredible.
This was widespread at the company. The Capcom sound team throughout the 80s and early 90s was almost entirely women. Just think about that for a second. An extremely influential group of female early game composers, all credited through pseudonyms, or sometimes not at all, and with the ports of music they composed credited to someone else.
Again, this is one particular anecdote from one particular company, and he's making out like this was usual for the games industry, and it may or may not have been. But my god, once again, do any of these women care? We have no idea. And this is what I find very distasteful. Again, Harris is putting words in their mouth. He is extrapolating their thoughts when we have no idea what they are. Again, with all the contacts he has, I mean, he's not exactly an unknown person. There is no way he did not have the opportunity to email these people and ask them for their opinions and get their side of the story. Which, don't get me wrong, I have a whole channel dedicated to extrapolating what people really mean and things like that. But at no point will you find me putting words in their mouth as Harris is doing here.
Maybe one of the reasons game development is perceived as a male-dominated industry is because all the women who've always been here keep getting left out of the history they wrote.
By having them in the credits, are you mad? Yes, don't get me wrong, it's under a pseudonym, and yes, I will take your word for it that that is company policy, that sound designers are put in under pseudonyms. I mean, for all I know, every name on that could be a pseudonym. I have no idea. But you can even tell from this picture here, that's a lot more than you would get normally in credits. To say a woman is invisible when on the screen he has got a picture of a woman, albeit with a pseudonym, it's just ridiculous to think that this is why game development is seen as male-dominated. The reason it's seen as male-dominated is because it is male-dominated, as is the rest of software development. For God's sake, when I was doing training to first become a software developer, the ratio was about 5 boys to 2 girls. The 2 girls dropped out within 3 weeks of the training. Again, anecdote, don't get me wrong, but there are many anecdotes like it, and it's never a problem when it's a female-dominated field, like most physicians are female, for example. You never get the problem there, so once again, I'm just going to ignore this point, but let Harris carry on.
If you're interested in the topic, I recommend The Street Fighter Lady and Female Credit by Andy Lemon and Hillegonda Rietveld. I've linked them in the description and plagiarized them heavily in this section of the video.
Right, naturally, because it's me, I'm going to quickly go through them. This is the abstract for the Street Fighter Lady. It is literally just explaining the story of, well, the Street Fighter Lady, in that she worked under a pseudonym in the credits and she was not given the proper recognition by this particular author's estimations anyway for the work she did on the game, even though she was paid what we can presume is a fair wage for her work. And now these old policies of working under a pseudonym are no longer in place, so we are seeing more about female composers. That's fine, that's all great. We are probably hearing more about composers in general as well, but this is a feminist paper, so what can you do? However, it is the other work that I have bigger problems with. In the abstract, it says the chapter is based on a collaborative project that focuses on the mostly female Capcom sound team. The Japanese game development company Capcom is known for some of the most popular action arcade games of the 80s and 90s, developed with mainly male players in mind. Okay, all seems fine and accurate so far. The composition and sound design work by this collective of female composers influenced a host of game composers through their pioneering work on early arcade hardware. And already I have a bit of an issue. It says female composers, implying that they only did the music, and sound design is a lot more than just the music in games. Yet, in versions of games ported from the arcade to home consoles and computers, their work was left uncredited. As from the looks of it, most of the sound design was. Popular recognition for their composition and sound design work had been relatively slow due to a number of factors that included the use of pseudonyms and the company's team-focused crediting policy. Okay, again, pseudonyms I have a bit more of an issue with. If you put in the credits it was this team that did it, I'm fine with that if they're fine with that. Again, we don't know if they have a problem with it. But this last part, as well as the routine exscription of women, they've just made up a word. I cannot find an exscription anywhere in the dictionary. The closest I can find is on Wiktionary, and it's an obsolete word that basically means a copy of. So they just full-on made up a word there. But anyway, I'm going to assume they mean that they purposefully took women's names out of the credits. So the routine exscription of women in a male-dominated game culture where, as Kokurek puts it, young competitive techno-masculinity is the foreground. So I have a much bigger problem with this one because, once again, it is blaming men, whereas the other one was just basically a history book. In fact, this is the worst type of abstract to make because all these people have done in this paper has taken 4 or 5 sentences from throughout the work and just copied and pasted it back into the abstract. And in fact, this is the worst type of studying methodology you can actually do, and they murder the name archaeology here. In summary, by applying a game archaeological methodology to the credited practices of 3 of Capcom's titles and in turn excavating their porting processes during the late 80s and 90s, we identified a diverse set of crediting practices that obscured the female members of the Capcom sound team. Essentially what they said there is we had a forthcoming conclusion that females working in the game industry were hidden. They found the fact that they were hidden and then applied the malice of their foregone conclusion to this game company, when there is no doubt in my mind that they did the same thing with males as well. But that brings them on to a worse conclusion. As we have shown, a complex set of politics played a role in preventing proper credit to their iconic and memorable video game music compositions at the height of their popularity. And then it goes into the same details that Harris just went through. But it is very irritating that Harris and these particular papers are trying to claim that this is politicising against having women properly credited in games, when the paper itself cites another study which found that about 35% of respondents in a 2006 survey claimed that they don't ever or only sometimes receive official credit for their efforts in games. Now, given that Harris's example is of literally 5 women at Capcom, and this study was of 134 people, I'm going to safely say that the majority of that 48 not credited are probably men. So let's not beat around the bush here. This was shoehorning in a complete feminist claptrap that has no base in reality yet again, in regards to the claim that women are invisible when it comes to game development, because clearly some men are too. Game development seems male-dominated because it is male-dominated, as is pretty much every part of software development. That is not to say women cannot do it or shouldn't do it. It's just a fact of the matter that men are thing-orientated and software development is a thing-orientated field.
But even when people are credited, the recognition can easily be minimized. Joey did some of the music for the Terminator Sega CD game. Its booklet says composed, produced, and performed by Tommy Tallarico. The half a dozen people who collaborated with him and wrote the other half of the songs only appear on the back of the case at the bottom as footnotes with stars corresponding to which songs they actually made.
I don't know why a lot of leftists do this, but he has just made a few claims that exaggerate the problem yet again. Again, just to be clear, Tommy Tallarico is a piece of work. He's a bad person, manipulative, liar, all that. But if you're going to make a video about a liar and a manipulator, it's probably best not to have this lying and manipulation in your own work as well, Harris. So we're going to go with the least worst claims first, the half a dozen people he collaborated with. For a start, if you collaborate with someone, you are actively working with them, so his credit is still fair to have in the game. And Joey himself, in the comment before, was fine with saying that he was working with Tommy, i.e. collaborating with him, so it's not unfair to have Tommy's name to all of these pieces of music. Secondly, you say half a dozen people, it's 4. I mean, obviously a nitpick there, I know what you mean. It was a few people. But finally, once again, you're saying it's obscure and all this? I mean, look, they made 4 songs, and you say Joey made a few of the songs. As we can see directly here, he made 1. It wasn't a few. You're getting your numbers all mixed up. You're exaggerating the problem yet again. And that's just not cricket when you're trying to say that Tommy Tallarico is a lying, manipulative piece of work, because at the moment, though to a much lesser extent, you're also being a lying, manipulative piece of work. The guy's done enough bad things, you don't need to pointlessly exaggerate these parts of the video. And again, I found that comment from Joey Curras by one Google of his name and music. That's all I googled, and in this 2-hour video where he's got many more people than me spending half an afternoon on a video, he either found it and didn't want to put it in because it goes against his whole thesis of these people are exploited, or he couldn't be bothered to find it, and both of those things are pretty bad when you're trying to make a massive dunk video like this. But one more point on this, in the booklet it says composed, performed, etc. by Tommy Tallarico. He clearly worked on majority of the songs, and as I say, he's a very good salesman. I think it's fair enough to have a section in the book explaining and having his own perspective on what it was like writing the music. And given the amount of things that he has worked on, along with his collaborators and employees, I think it's fair to say yes, he was fairly influential and was indeed an icon at the time. Again, you can both be quite a talented and good musician and also be a total piece of work. In fact, it's probably a prerequisite to be a successful musician.
So their names don't get noticed quite as much. Joey's song was so good, Tommy saw fit to put it on another album with his name and face on it. Tommy Tallarico Virgin Games Greatest Hits.
You see what I mean? If you just had the part where it was, oh, he didn't actually write all the songs, some were made by others, and now he's taking credit for it, that'd be fine, but no. You had to take this pretty scummy thing to do, and then make it seem worse than it actually was. And the problem is, even though these things are small, if you start doing that, it does really break apart the rest of your video, unfortunately. But I only have issues with your conclusion here, because it is just mired in your personal politics, and when you're making a video like this, it is the last thing you should have in your conclusion.
Joey's name is even smaller on the back of this one. It's not difficult to see why Joey's contributions to game history are being forgotten.
Again, I have to bring this round. Does Joey care? Did you care to reach out and ask him about it? It's kind of important because your implication here is that, oh, Joey was kicked down by demand. His name isn't in the history books as a great video game composer because of Tommy Tallarico. He deserves all that Roblox money, when really, we have no idea if he cares.
Re-uploads of the full Terminator CD soundtrack onto YouTube just say composed by Tommy. There's a re-upload of specifically Joey's song too. The uploader, who understandably missed the tiny note on the back of the CD case, credits it to Tommy. The top comment is a guy called Joey Curras, explaining that he actually made it, but also thanking people for their kind words.
He has it in the video. He says he worked with Tommy. We have it right here. We have evidence that Joey doesn't particularly care about the recognition. Yes, he likes that people thought it was a good piece of music. He appreciates the comments. He's letting people know in his own way that he did it. Beyond that, he doesn't care. Harris literally has his comment here implying he doesn't care. It's just a simple, hey, I actually wrote this. I was working with Tommy on the game. Thank you for liking it. That's it. You probably could have reached out in this comment section here, and yet you didn't. What is wrong with you, Harris?
We're at the point the actual composers have to explain they made the song in the comments of re-uploads of their work misattributed to their old boss.
Yes, and believe me, Harris, I think you are doing the right thing by pointing out that this is wrong. However, we have no evidence to suggest that he cares beyond correcting people. We have absolutely no evidence to suggest that he holds ill will towards Tommy. All we know is that he's a guy who doesn't go on the internet too often under his own name and is still working on sound design for games. Probably because he enjoys doing it and has much better things to worry about in his life than whether people know exactly the songs that he wrote. Clearly he cares enough to correct people when they think Tommy wrote something that he did instead, but beyond that, you're just putting words in his mouth, and that is what is annoying me.
This extends back into the regular music industry as a whole, of course, but also into material we covered here. Michael Jackson's long-rumoured, now semi-confirmed work on Sonic 3 isn't all it's cracked up to be either. Like a certain other composer, Michael had people who worked for him. According to Brad Buxer, an American keyboardist and composer who did a lot of work with Jackson, and actually is credited on Sonic 3, Jackson basically made him do most of it. Once you're well enough established, it only gets easier to exploit the talents of people working for you and build up your own status on the back of something you made someone else do.
I mean, this is just life. This has happened plenty of times with volunteering work I've done. You get thanked as a team. You get thanked individually when you individually do something for someone. In terms of the working world, he was thanked, this particular guy who worked with Michael Jackson and all the rest of them, he was thanked by being paid and being kept on to do more projects with them. If he cared so much about his name recognition, it probably wouldn't actually be that difficult if you already have a name of working with someone famous and then go beyond that. Joey is currently a freelance sound designer, and from what I can tell, he is not out of work. He is doing pretty well for himself and is still making soundtracks and sound design for games like Fortnite, The Binding of Isaac. You know, he's got plenty of work and he clearly has a good enough portfolio to do what he wants. If he cared about his name recognition, he would do what Tommy Tallarico did, but he is not. And we can only presume it is because he simply doesn't care. Please stop putting words in his mouth, Harris.
The industry is still constructed in a way that treats individual creators, usually the biggest names on the project, as the true authors, attributing a game's success to them and not the many people who did the work.
Again, this is a part that is annoying me. It is the old CEOs or managers or whatever don't actually do any work. It is a bold-faced lie. I have had to manage people in my past as well. It is a very difficult job. Choosing the right people to do the right bits of work, having your own work to do in the meantime, and all the rest of that nonsense. But the thing is, in his own examples here with Tommy Tallarico, he's making it out like Tommy Tallarico has done absolutely nothing in his life but taken the work of other people. It's not true. He has composed his own music, he performs said music, and then yes, his name is misattributed due to manipulative practices to other people's work. Do these people particularly care? From what I can tell, no, and we have no reason to think otherwise. But Harris is then trying to say that, in fact, no, Tommy Tallarico has done nothing with his life, takes credit and money for other people's work when he's actually done nothing himself, and now he's applying it to the whole industry and the whole system, and it's just simply not how it works. And yet videos like this are part of the reason that millennials and zoomers are going even more left-wing, because this is how they believe the world works, and it's not.
Things are so bad, even the recipients of this praise have called it out. To quote one of the worst articles ever written, "There's a tendency among the press to attribute the creation of a game to a single person," says Warren Spector, creator of Thief and Deus Ex. The journalistic attitude to credit in gaming used to be so awful, it's not even clear who wrote this. The article is credited to IGN staff.
Do you see the other problem I'm having with this video? He has to go back 10 years to find these terrible examples. And it's not unusual for even mainstream media outlets to have op-eds that just say by, say, The Guardian or The Independent or, say, editorial. Because it means one of two things. It either means a lot of people put their work to it and they don't really care to have their name to it, or it means it was written by the editor. That's typically what that means. But yeah, this is a good point. We do tend to just attribute the creation of games to single people. That's because it's a lot simpler in people's minds. But if you really have a conversation with people who think that, it turns out they don't genuinely think that. They say, oh, of course there's a team behind it. They're just the face of it. I mean, I think back to the video created by Internet Historian about No Man's Sky. That whole video basically only mentions Sean Murray and at times does mention the team behind him, but the whole video is about him, and the reason it's about him is because he is the face of the company, He is the leader of the team, and he was the man up on stage constantly having to effectively lie about the game for Sony's benefit. And yet, once again, this man is essentially the Tommy Tallarico of that particular studio, Hello Games. Now, if Harris, push came to shove for Harris, there is no way that Harris would be saying that Sean Murray is an exploitative CEO, even though he is CEO of the company. No, he'd say it's Sony's fault for exploiting them, even though the company was an independent developer and has gone back to being an independent developer now. But of course, this is the problem with debating the economic systems we have. Whenever you go to capitalism, it's only the warts we're going to talk about. When we go to Harris's ideal situation and system, well, I have no idea what it is. All I know is that he wants people credited for the proper work they did, which I am fine with if that's what they want as well. But we have no idea if that's what they want.
You can tell a lot about an industry by how it treats the people who actually do the work. In terms of the scope of time, the average game developer is fucked.
Yep, this was a problem Gamergate pointed out too. It is very popular to point out that game developers do have a lot of pressure put on them by publishers.
The hundreds and sometimes thousands of people who work on games now throw away years of their lives, and so many of them go completely unappreciated. Meanwhile, the most asshole-ish men in the industry continue to promote themselves off the back of the efforts of the people working for them.
Again, it's like he thinks that all the lead developers do is delegate jobs to the people beneath them and then sit at their desks smoking a cigar while they wait for the money to roll in. I can't think of an example when these problems keep coming up and the articles are written about the final massive push and the massive amount of overtime that people at, say, Rockstar had to do to get Red Dead Redemption out on time. Not once can I think of a time where the workers and the developers were saying, but do you know what the real problem is? The fact that my name isn't on the credits properly. No, the problems they have is that they can't see their family properly and they don't feel they are being paid properly for their work. Well, the thing is, if they're working overtime, they are being paid for said overtime. Usually, anyway. The issue never is that they aren't getting paid enough for it. The issue is pretty much always, oh my god, I just cannot see my family, and when I do, I just need to sleep. But for some reason, Harris has taken that issue and said, yeah, the problem is that their names aren't on the credits.
Imagine making great sound effects for years and years, only for your boss to tell some guy in a Halloween mask on a live stream with 100 views that he did it.
That's a reference to Doomcock interviewing Tommy Tallarico. Clips of it are in Harris's video, but once again, did you reach out and ask Joey if he cared about that? I don't think you did. So, no, I don't know what that feels like, and neither do you, because you didn't ask him.
We don't recognise the work and achievements of people who make games.
How many of them care? They just want to provide entertainment for you and be paid for it. I say this as someone adjacent to the industry.
We recognise the people who exploited that work the best.
Yes, and if they are taking credit for things that they didn't do, then fair enough. But no, if they did lead the team, I'm fine for them taking credit for being the lead developer of the game. People in the industry understand what that means. If people outside the industry don't, then that is on them. And videos like this, or another video explaining exactly how it works, is probably warranted. You were doing the right thing with this video pointing out Tommy is a total tit. You are doing the wrong thing by saying that he is the industry standard, when he is quite clearly actually quite an extreme example of the problem.
It's so easy for history and credit to get wiped away. Case in point, we could have never learned that the oof was from Messiah and assumed Roblox made it forever.
And yet, no, thanks to you, we found out it is from Messiah. Great work, that's fine. Has Joey cared enough to push that actually he made the sound and it was from Messiah, and that he's trying to get the Roblox money? No, he didn't. Tommy did, because he's a greedy tit.
There are thousands of people whose good work on games will never be properly credited, who we might have already forgotten about.
Yeah, probably. That's just a fact of life. Who knows who invented the wheel? Absolutely nobody. Who invented the RAM on my PC? It's probably just a Google away. Who invented the first fan? I don't know, and don't get me wrong, sound design is a big part of video games. However, because they are such complex projects, of course names get lost into the wilderness. Is it a problem? I don't know. I don't think I'd care that much if people didn't know if I made a particular game. I think I'd just like the money for the work I got and then enjoy my time with my family, friends, and hobbies. Tommy Tallarico clearly feeds off attention and has a narcissistic streak in him. So does Harris. But not everyone has that, fortunately.
Gaming is still a young medium.
He's over 40 years old. How is that young?
but already the sands of our history are spilling through our Monster Energy sodden fingers.
Well, start recording it properly then, but you're not going to do that. All you're going to do is say, oh, this is a problem, and once again, as a typical communist, say that it's for other people to solve. This video is unironically like Marcus Rashford pointing out that school children are going hungry, and then setting up a charity to feed said hungry school children, and then say, I shouldn't be doing this, the government should. This is exactly what Harris is doing, but to the gaming industry.
Entire games are at risk of being forgotten, never mind the human beings who created them.
Yeah, that's just history. That always happens. There will literally be hundreds upon thousands of stories and pieces of work done and art made that have been forgotten to the sands of time. It's a sad part of reality, and I have absolutely no idea what your proposed solution here is, other than put people's names in the credits, which we do now. But you're making it out like this Joey Curras story was, oh, Tommy Tallarico took all the money, ran, and left Joey Curras in a ditch to die, when, no, he's still alive and he's still doing work. And Harris's point is, oh my god, I didn't even realise that the guy who made the U sound worked on Fortnite. Isn't that a nice trivia question? Yes, it is, and it doesn't actually go beyond that. So effectively what Harris has done in this conclusion is made a complete mountain out of a molehill, and I am here to point out that that is very stupid, and he keeps lying in his conclusion as well.
The most valuable contribution Tommy has made to the story is mentioning that the voice actress was the daughter of someone who worked at Shiny Entertainment at the time.
Well, that and setting up a studio that allowed for talent to flourish, and apparently for very memorable meme sounds to be created, along with soundtracks and other sound effects that people remember fondly. I mean, I don't see why that's a bad thing. That's not a bad part of it. I mean, I really do not like this at all. Yes, Tommy Tallarico, again, piece of work, but again, that doesn't mean that he can't have done good things. And that doesn't mean setting up a business that has his name and therefore his name ends up on the credits when you are crediting that team. That doesn't mean that's a bad thing either. Did anyone who used to work there have a problem with it? By implication, we have to say no, otherwise they wouldn't have worked for them. In fact, Joey's probably very happy he worked for them because it allowed for him to make a portfolio and work on games like Fortnite.
The people who know who this was, and the parent who worked on the game, those people aren't going to be around forever. We have a limited time to learn who this was. The thing about history is, it happens, and then it's gone. If we don't work to preserve it, eventually it becomes impossible.
Yeah, sure, but when it comes to most memes, I know this because I used to watch RudeTube over here in the UK. For those who don't know, in America, it was essentially just some guy introducing funny meme videos based on how many views they got within a particular subject. So top 50 epic fails based on the view count. And all it was based off was who uploaded the video and who had the most views. And sometimes they'd go over and interview the people if they found out who they were and contacted them. Most of the time though, it's this is a pseudonym, there is no way to contact them, and yet this video has hundreds of thousands if not millions of views. It's going to be lost to history before that. I mean, for God's sake, assuming I never actually put my name to this channel, people aren't going to know who I am. Do I particularly care? No, because what matters more is the products I am making for your entertainment. And I am putting forward ideas that are either alternative or develop ideas that people already have. That's what I care more about. I don't really care that my face isn't on it. Genuinely, the only reason I can think of that I would put my face and name to this is so that people will take me more seriously. Because doing it behind lovely vistas and a little avatar of a knight I nicked from a video game that I have never credited the artist for, ironically. It takes a lot of luck to actually make it onto YouTube and get bigger than 1 million subscribers, or even 10,000 subscribers that I am actually pretty close to. But at this point it doesn't matter to me. This is a hobby. I do this for fun. I do this because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel fulfilled or more fulfilled. And from that perspective, I think that's what Joey Curras has. I don't think he cares that his name isn't to these things. I don't think the girl that made the oomph sound really cares that her name isn't to it. Whereas people like Harris here, who's the type of person to give to a groomer charity out of spite, does. And so does Tommy Tallarico, but Harris will never accept that he is more similar to Tommy than he would like to know.
If we don't set a precedent of taking people's work and the accuracy of records of who did what seriously, we leave it to the liars and opportunists of the world to make up that history.
Yep, and if that was the point of your video, that would be absolutely fine, but you couldn't just leave it at that, could you? You had to exaggerate the problem that, in this example, Tommy Tallarico was actually partaking in, and then you had to say, oh, it's actually industry standard to act like Tommy Tallarico, which, from what I can tell, isn't true, because pretty much every game nowadays has one of the main menu options as go to credits, and then you can see all the credits and see all the names. And how many people sit through the credits and read the names? The answer is probably less than the amount of digits I have on my left hand.
And it honestly, on a spiritual level, fills me with immense grief thinking about the people who made the things I care about dying unrecognized for what they did and being forgotten.
Yeah, and I really hate this crap as well. That's not true. He does not have immense spiritual grief for this. If he did, he would give up making YouTube videos and make it his life's work to correct the record on all these things. Instead, all he did was take other people's work, ironically, from the academic studies he took, take their word for what is going on and attribute the same malice they did to the video game companies, although at least he did admit that he plagiarised their work, though if you are referencing, that is a perfectly fine thing to do, and then say, oh, this is actually an industry-wide problem, which, again, it probably is a problem that goes beyond Tommy Tallarico and Capcom, but if it does fill him with immense grief like he's trying to perform here, yeah, he would make it a life's project to try and correct the record on these things, but he's not, because he's a liar. Is it a problem? Yeah, I'd say so. Are there bigger problems in the industry? Absolutely. Let's, focus on them first, because this issue appears to be resolving itself anyway, and in fact probably has fully resolved itself at this point.
Gaming is just old enough that we're losing that first generation. Tommy got the rights to Intellivision because he bought them from the estate of its last president when he passed away. The name, the branding, it's his now.
And once again, Harris, you are showing on screen, in your own video, that particular history isn't actually being lost. I take your point, yes, some of the history will be lost, as all history is lost throughout time. But if you're going to use examples of it, try and actually find something, as you did throughout this video, of something that was genuinely lost. Don't then say, here's another example, and then have there, oh, here's the obituary of the guy who owned Intellivision, and then try and say, see, Tommy's trying to rewrite history. It's stupid, it doesn't work.
The original Intellivision YouTube channel, with some of the final appearances of its former president, one of the world's first ever game designers, along with the original Intellivision website with its beautiful Web 1.0 history of the company, are now relegated to obscurity under another name, while Tommy continues to use that name to advertise a product that doesn't even exist.
Once again, anyone who actually cares about this, anyone willing to invest in this, the things that actually matter, it's not that difficult to do due diligence and realise that, yes, Tommy is manipulating it here. And thanks to this video, Harris, you have made sure that now Tommy Tallarico is a name that is associated with manipulative, terrible, corporative practices. Well done, you did a really good thing there, I genuinely mean that. It's a shame you've had to undermine the whole thing with this horrible conclusion. All your conclusion had to be was Tommy is a terrible person, and that would be that, but no, you've brought in this whole claptrap.
What history will look like 20, 30, 100 years in the future is being decided now. Now is the time to decide if Tommy Tallarico made the oof for Roblox, or if Joey Kouros made it for Messiah.
And yeah, that's absolutely fine. If we're trying to make history as objective as possible, that is fine. The problem that you're having with this conclusion is that you are then undermining your own point. You're making claims that aren't true, that, say on the smaller side of things, that Tommy collaborated with 6 people when it was actually 4 for the Terminator soundtrack. This whole conclusion has just been putting words in people's mouths who worked at Capcom and Joey Kouros' mouth, even though all these people are still alive and you can ask them for their opinion on it. The record you are trying to set here is still wrong. It's the reason I'm making this video. I am making corrections to your history that you have written here. The problem is that a lot more people are going to watch your video than mine. So ironically, my corrections are going to be lost to time. A lot quicker than yours will anyway. But hey, you've got to do something, because I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, I really care that people aren't credited properly in games, because I'm just honestly, I'm not that bothered that it wasn't done correctly in the past, and probably still isn't done correctly in some cases today. However, if those people who aren't being credited properly do care that much, they can probably ask the right people to get it put in the credits. My brother's worked in production television before, he was an accountant there. For a bit of added context, it was for regularly produced live sports, the details of which I won't go into, and then for this particular sport there were big games going on, and that is when they'd have proper full-blown credits at the end, and that'd be twice a year, and only then would his name be in the credits. Did he care his name weren't in the credits and his name wasn't put to the productions all the time? No, he really didn't care. All it would say at the end is, produced by production company. Credits would be who was hosting and who the head producer was. that would be it for the main daily programmes of the sport. My brother didn't care. Instead, he would let the family and his friends know when his name would be on TV. And he only ever told us that one time and said, yeah, it'll be there other times when it's big events like that. And that was it. And that is probably what most of these people think, Harris. And you have just put words in their mouth. And this is now the popular source for the Tommy Tallarico saga and the issues that it is a good example of. But now you've just had to go ahead and ruin it, and I find that incredibly disappointing.
And Tommy has already put his finger on the scale, decided how he wants all this to be remembered. If you buy his new sound pack, the metadata in the Roblox oof has been changed to say Tommy Tallarico.
Just to reiterate the point, you have tipped the scales of what you think these people like Joey Corras want and believe. You have put words in their mouth, and yet people are going to watch this video and assume that it is an accurate reflection of how they think and feel, when we have absolutely no evidence to think that.
But here's a corollary I came up with all by myself. Those who let hucksters write the history they're trying to learn from are doomed in some other horrible way.
And assuming that is true, then Harris can enjoy experiencing being doomed in that other horrible way. Because as far as I'm concerned, he has done the same thing as Tommy Tallarico by trying to rewrite history, and then take credit for saying, hey, Joey Corras, you really cared about this, I'm going to take credit for it. Which is fine, because to be fair, he did the work, but from what I can tell, Joey Corras doesn't really care. Anyway, when I started this video, I noticed that I took out a 10-minute clip from Harris's video and thought, oh cool, that'll take me about an hour to make this video, and it'll only be 20 minutes to half an hour long. Anyway, here we are, nearly an hour in, so I'm not going to go beyond that. You know my conclusions at this point. I would recommend the Harris video if you have 2 hours, but I think I've given you all the main points of it. It's just Harris has most of the receipts, and is quite funny throughout the video while doing it. Anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So, as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.